All right. Item 1 on the agenda, roll call. Looks like everybody on the commission is here today. I believe Councilman White is out this morning for an SBCAG meeting, so yeah, he won't be joining us. Okay, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify on 6A, Sarah Issa will be providing that presentation instead of Lisa Arroyo. And then just a small nuance with item 6C. I will be providing a drought update, but the Water Commission has already seen the annual water supply plan, and this is the title of what's going to council next week. And so that's kind of the little nuance there. But specifically, my drought update today will be focused. I will not be talking about the water supply plan unless, of course, the Water Commission has some questions.
Okay, alrighty. Moving on to item number 4, public comment. Is there anybody that would like to make any comments today? Nope. Okay. Move on to item 5, consent items. I'll just kind of go through each one of these if you guys want to make comments on them. And then we can approve them at the end. 5A is the meeting minutes. Any comments?
I have comments. Actually, starting with the consent calendar, it says Commissioner Burney recused herself from the October meeting because she was not in attendance. Actually, she was absent from the October meeting, not recusing. Recusing, you're in the room and you step out. So the use of the word recuse is wrong. It's the same thing in A. She was not recusing. She was absent for that particular meeting. And what happens then is we don't have a necessary quorum to approve those minutes, so that under item 5A, it should show no action was taken. And if you really want to get nitpicky about it, on item B, approve the minutes once corrected, it should be as corrected. And if you look up above, the correct commissions, they're really direct commissioners. They're not, it's in the paragraph of the consent items. In order to show the correct commissions who made the motions, it's commissioners. That's a typo. I did read these.
But we did end up approving October minutes, right?
I thought we did. So that was
Yeah.
the other question I had. We had all this discussion.
So she recused herself from voting, or from...
Yeah, but you see, the minutes right now say essentially that she was absent and from this meeting, so it was not discussed. Well, it was discussed, and I thought we took the action pending legal approval.
We did. I think there was 3 people who present.
There were 3 people present. One had to, in that particular case, abstain.
Yeah, she
Right, so it
abstained.
would be 201 to approve the minutes for October.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
correct.
So I would, when we get to the motion, I would make the motion to approve the consent calendar with those changes to the minutes.
All right. Excellent. All right. Any other comments on the minutes? No? Okay. We'll move on to 5B, the agreement for subsurface water and groundwater monitoring.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I thought it was slightly confusing where some of the wells actually are located, and particularly the ones that have the USGS numbers with the sections and subdivisions of the sections in there. I got out my old Peter Martin report and looked up where they were so I could tell which wells we were talking about. But if you could just put a small note after the well designation, approximately where it is, I think that would be helpful for readers that aren't conversant with those numbers.
Chair Kilburn, Commissioner
Yes.
Kelly, my name is Kelly Dyer, I'm the Water Supply Manager. There is on table 1 an indication of which subunit the monitoring wells are located. That's on page 5 of the letter from USGS. So if you're looking for more detail on where specifically they are within the subunit, all of the monitoring wells are on the USGS website, so they can be looked up online where they're located. Is that helpful, or would you like to see a specific map?
I saw that listing on the table 1 there, and that was helpful also. I'm not sure that was indicated up at, when the wells were mentioned up in the text previously, but I think one of the first wells that was mentioned was near the coast in the downtown basin, so just a very brief description like that might be helpful.
Okay, I'll see if I can add to the CAR. Or prepare a map somehow. Is that something I think is necessary for this?
The map might be a little overkill for this, but just a brief noting of where the wells are, I think would be helpful.
Okay, the
Or
letter-
just say, refer to table 1 for location.
Okay, the letter is from the federal government, the proposal is from the USDS, so we have to ask them to revise their letter to incorporate it into that portion. Otherwise, what I could do is change the council agenda report, which doesn't really go into a lot of detail. So if you're looking at the letter addressed to Ms. York from the United States Geological Survey, any edits to that proposal from them would have to work with USGS to change the language.
It looks like most of the well designations are in that letter, so I don't know if it's worth the bother of asking them to change it, but there's some way to make it a little more user-friendly to
Yeah.
indicate where these things are.
On your council report on the first page, groundwater monitoring, it mentions 636 monitoring locations, and maybe mention there that locations are specified in Table A of the USGS, so that at least people, when they first read it, can say, "Oh, I'm going to reference." I don't know, maybe be a short workaround, but.
That's a good suggestion, we could do that, and also refer to the website, USGS website, where all the well locations can be looked up digitally.
Sounds good, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. On to item 5C. Question or comments? Okay, 5D. It's an introduction of ordinance to use recycled water for the First Baptist Church.
I'd like to pull this off of consent and wait till after we have the update in 6B, recycled water treatment plant modifications, before we take a vote on this, please.
Okay, we can postpone that one. All right. 5E, adoption of the resolution required to increase the SRF loan.
Couple comments. Looking at, on page 2, first, the budget item shows $71,000 total for the change to the less the anticipation costs. The resolution section 2 says 72, so that's inconsistent. You got
I
that
saw
one?
that also.
Okay. The other thing that I thought, and again, this is more for staff in terms of their final staff report, in that paragraph, initial discussions with staff. Well, when the public reads that, that sounds like it's you. And I think it's really discussions with either a state agency or something else rather than staff.
Correct. That would be state staff. Yeah.
Yeah, like state staff, that's what I thought. But you might say staff of who does that? In fact, who does that? What agency looks at the revolving loan fund?
This is the State Water Resources Control Board,
Okay.
like they're that agency.
And then this is not really a comment, but other than formatting, you have the Water Commission's action at the end of discussion, and then you have go on with financial information and other stuff. I think format-wise, at least I'd suggest that the Water Commission simply be the last item after everything's there. Then you have what the Water Commission did. So on all the staff reports,
Got it.
it'd be in a standard place. It'd just be part of the formatting. This is a suggestion.
Do appreciate these comments on this. We've been scrambling to try and get this paperwork going, and I
Totally get it.
specifically asked engineering to kind of help lead us on this, and so that's fantastic suggestion, though.
Okay, any other comments on 5E? Okay, we'll move on to 5F, authorization to apply for an SRF loan for the desal conveyance pipeline.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I have one comment and one question. In the first paragraph of the discussion, it says the city has the ability to expand the plant in the future. Again, my comment is, that sounds as if it's you just go out and build it. I'm wondering whether that is permit authority or some, what other kind of word, where the ability, I mean, it's
Permitted capacity, maybe.
limited capacity. And then my question, next sentence, to adequately distribute water from an expanded desalination plant. My question is the conveyance system being sized for the 10,000 acre foot maximum?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I would suggest then maybe the distribute water from a fully expanded desalination plant. So it's pretty clear that the conveyance system isn't we're doing this, it's some lesser amount, and if we come back and expand, we'd have to expand this again. So that'd be my comment.
Question. So Josh, in the middle of that last paragraph, you referenced that if you get up to Mission Street, you can then supply water from the desal plant to anywhere in the city. Does that mean exactly what it says? If Cater went down for whatever reason, you don't have enough water to process, whatever, and you can then run to anywhere in the city, no matter the topography, as far up into the hills as you need from the desal?
That is correct. This water would be able to, we'd be pushing water basically up the transmission mains that feed out of Cater. And so we could basically push all the way up to the Cater Clearwell, and therefore be able to distribute anywhere in the city.
Pumping capacity allows for that? There's not other issues there to be able to do that?
Correct. The discussions that, IDE's proposal they're putting together now is going to include modifications to the current pumping facility that's going to put the treated desal water into the system. It will have adequate capacity. We've looked at the sizing of that to pump water all the way up to Cater if we need to do that.
And the cost of that's already reflected somewhere else?
It will be reflected in any type of expansion costs that we start to talk about.
Okay, so to get it to anywhere in the city, that $10 million number there is not the end number.
That is strictly for the conveyance pipeline. The expansion costs that we are working with IDE on, that is still eligible under the current SRF loan, and so that would include any modifications to the pump station.
Okay, but it is an additional cost to be able to pump it anywhere in the city.
Yes.
Okay, see. So I guess just to comment on that, this is becoming one of those children's block sets where you open a big box and you get a series of smaller boxes. Only, of course, our boxes are bigger somehow as you go, and it's just at some point, people, when I'm standing in the grocery store line, they just start to keep shaking their heads as another rock falls on your shoulders, and so it's. I think at some point you have to clearly say where the light at the end of the tunnel is, both in process and dollars. And when it says here that for $10 million, we can get a conveyance piece of equipment put in place and it will go everywhere to the city, it will then be able to pump everywhere to the city. That's not exactly true. We still have other expenses that we're working on past that point to be able to accomplish that. Right? It'll just be a different discussion some other time that somebody else has to swallow. Right?
Correct. It would be what we were kind of setting up here is that as we start to talk about potential expansion of the facility, whether it's for our own purposes or potentially for a water sales agreement with Montecito, is that in order to convey that water, we would need this conveyance pipeline. We currently have a structure in which to distribute the desal water from our current facility. We do think that this transmission main improves that ability to distribute water, but it's not a requirement under the current capacity that we're talking about.
I agree with
Yeah.
you, but I think people outside this room are just looking at, this gets watered everywhere in the city. They're not looking at the other pieces that are moving around. And, that's why I'm asking the question, so when I get queried
Yeah.
on why can't we do it yet? Oh, because we still have to go get some pumping improvements that cost money too. It's just, I think there's a better public relations effort that could be made for people who aren't intimately familiar with this process and the end costs when we talk about concepts like this.
I completely agree, and the intent with this is to start at least the loan process, because it does take so long. But we will be having an exhaustive discussion about what this conveyance pipeline is exactly going to do and how those costs fit into the treatment plant. We're pulling those numbers together now. In a perfect world, I would have preferred to have that discussion and then do these loan documents. But given that this process here could potentially take up to a year, I wanted to get it started so that we didn't have, this wasn't holding us up potentially later on. So it's really leaving my options open. I didn't in any way mean to kind of short circuit the process. This is really just starting down the road so that we can apply for a loan, should we need it.
Yeah, I think it's good to have the option to find a low-cost loan option for the project if it moves forward, so.
We did get confirmation from state staff that our initial loan was 1.6% interest for the initial plant, and they did raise their rates to 1.7%, but it's still a fantastic interest rate.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, going through this process doesn't preclude us or prohibit us from getting reimbursements from, say, Montecito if they decide to, jump in on the project. Okay, good.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd make a motion to, one, pull item D off the consent calendar, put it on for full discussion later on the agenda. 2, approve the consent calendar with the changes to the minutes that we discussed. 3, to recognize it on items E and F, that this is a Water Commission recommendation that council adopt a resolution, because it's listed as adoption of a resolution, which would require a roll call vote, can't be on a consent calendar. So these items are really not the adoption. They're actually recommendation to council that they adopt the resolution.
That's correct.
So with those, I'd recommend approval of the consent calendar.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. That's very helpful. Okay, we will move on to item 6A, the El Estero Drain Restoration, final design and restoration implementation.
That's it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm Sarah Isa. I'm a project manager in Public Works. I'm currently managing this project through the final design. As you may know, there's quite a history of this project, and I'm going to summarize it quickly for you and talk about the contract that will be going to council in February. This is the project location in the yellow box, right south of El Estero. Does this pointer work? Thank you. Okay. So this is a drainage area that's adjacent to Laguna Channel and also to the Fez Parker property to the east, which is nearing a restoration phase as well. There's a close-up of it. As you can see, there's a swale through the middle of the property. There's quite a bit of history to this project. Some of you are probably aware of the history, and we're nearing the end, so I will summarize it quickly. In 1998, Public Works acquired the property from the Parker family, the Fez Parker family. Work commenced in 1999 to remove trash and debris with the ultimate goal of using the property for El Estero. which it included vegetation removal. Once we began vegetation removal, we were notified that we needed a coastal development permit and also an Army Corps of Engineers permit. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers determined that the work impacted some wetlands that were on site, and they also, other responsible agencies, Department of Fish and Wildlife, determined that the Pacific pond turtle habitat was impacted as well. We moved forward with pursuing a coastal development permit in 2000, and we had a wetland restoration plan approved by ABR in 2002. And we began restoration in 2002 as well to restore the areas that were disturbed. However, during construction, soil contamination was discovered, and it was found that elevated levels of petroleum, hydrocarbon, lead, mercury, arsenic, other elements were found on site. So all restoration activities were halted until present. During that time, from 2002 to present, we've gone through several risk assessments, human health risk assessments that were prepared and submitted to the county, which were approved in 2014. So all of this resulted in a project delay to basically decide how to remediate and restore the site. The remedial action plan was performed by Arcadis, who found 3 areas of concern to be remediated, and it also recommends the removal of the contaminated soil in 2 locations, and also recommends not disturbing the contaminated soil in a 3rd location. This is a landscape sheet from the 2001 restoration plan. The current plan that will likely be approved is consistent with this 2001 restoration plan.
Mr. Chairman?
So I wanted to show you some pictures of the.
Excuse me, I don't notice any further mention of turtles. Are the turtles physically present at the site?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to give you a little bit more background as to what happened in 2002 when we began construction. This is a construction photo from 2002, about the time that they discovered the contamination. Another photo during construction. Once the contamination was discovered, it was decided to cover it up and wait until we had approvals and a plan in place to fully restore it. So it was a plastic liner was placed on top. Part of this current project is to fully remove the plastic liner and, of course, restore and remediate. So we have a current design. This is a 2016 design prepared by Arcadis. It includes an improvement for the southwestern pond turtle. These blue divots are actually turtle basking areas. And these are areas that will have soil removed as part of the remediation, so it's a dual benefit. There's also a turtle ramp here in the channel up into El Estero Drain so that they can gain access. Currently, to answer your question, Commissioner Keller, they are in Laguna Channel and they do come up here, not through a formal access. These are the hot spots identified in the remedial action plan, which was approved by the county. This is again, these are going to be now divots where turtles can reside. Also, we're going to be improving a gate between our property and the Fess Parker property to allow further migration of the turtles. All of this was reviewed and approved by Fish and Wildlife as well. This is a section of the proposed turtle ramp. In February, we will be going to council for a contract for Arcadis to perform final design and prepare a bid solicitation package. The total will be $72,000. And the scope includes detailed specs on the restoration areas, more on the remediation areas, the turtle ramp, and the modified gate that I just discussed. as well as their attendance at a final ABR meeting, which was requested by Planning Commission when we went to them in November 2016 for a substantial conformance determination. The schedule would be to prepare final bid documents and restoration plans, which would be available 12 weeks after the task authorization. And then construction would begin late in 2017 with plants in the ground, hopefully before next winter. Today, we're seeking your favorable recommendation to council for this contract, which will be going February 7th. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Thank you.
I got a question on the proposed plan. I know we're hauling dirt off and getting rid of it. Do we have to import dirt to, or are we balancing? Okay, good. Question?
Chairman, so the final status, this will be some, like a park, will it be accessible to the public, or it's just a preservation area that's isolated from everything else?
Commissioner Keller, that's a very good question. The original plan had it slated as a public viewing area. However, in development of the remedial action plan, the county felt that it would be better fenced off because we're not fully remediating the site. It would also be more protective of the turtles not to have human access through the site.
Since we inherited this problem, is there any kind of grants or anything that can offset the cost of doing this project, or are we fully responsible for it?
Yeah, at this time, we are the owners of this cleanup, and unfortunately, yeah, it started out as an effort to try and gain some additional land to be able to, facilitate future changes to the LSR wastewater treatment plant. So it's a really frustrating project. I mean, it's been around for a while. At this time, we do not have and are not eligible for any grants, and likely part of that has to do with the actions that were taken long ago when we're in violation of our coastal development permit. However, construction, I don't know, Sarah, maybe you can expand on what we estimate construction would cost, because we have been setting it aside that money.
Yes, construction, the entire budget, I believe, and Lisa can help, is $350,000, and we will also be bound to a 5-year maintenance and monitoring plan to achieve the specific performance criteria outlined in the habitat restoration plan. Also, Mr. Chair, to address your question, we did receive a notice of violation from the Army Corps, which is pending, so we would like to resolve that as soon as possible.
Okay.
I have a question. Sarah, do you follow this all the way to the end?
I'm sorry, me personally?
You follow this right through the ABR, the return to ABR?
Yes, sir, yes.
So I don't remember anybody else's comments, but from November, I just remember mine, and that was I think Stephen Greer presented it at Planning Commission, but the comment I had there was really to make an effort on the landscaping plan to put quality trees in on the south side bordering the railroad, both for noise buffer and for air quality reasons. We've got the spot. You don't often have the spot, and it seems like a reasonable way to make a contribution to that and spend a little money that way. So I'd just make that comment again today.
Thank you, Commissioner Jordan. Yes, those comments were noted, and Arcadis is on board to attend the final ABR hearing to make sure that all comments are incorporated.
Chairman, it may be obvious due to the fact that this is moving forward, but I would assume that the contaminated soil that is remaining in place does not have effects on the life of turtles.
Commissioner Keller, that's correct. So the areas that will not be remediated are considered capped or are not permeable. So they will not have a long-lasting effect.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, I guess we're looking for a recommendation to approve the professional services to council.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to make concur with staff recommendation to pass this on to council. Also with a comment that it is, again, difficult to look at items where we didn't have a draft staff report in the packet. So it's hard to bring both this and the next item forward, and we don't really know anything about it coming into the meeting and are asked to basically make a recommendation. So it's a comment, but anyway, I recommend staff recommendation, take this on to council.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we'll move on to item 6B, the recycled water treatment plant modifications. Ms. Arroyo. And I-
Propaganda.
I can't see that. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Lisa Arroyo, Wastewater System Manager. I'm pleased to be here to discuss and present the recycled water treatment plant modifications. In today's presentation, I'm going to recap portions of the September presentation that I gave just to bring us all back up to speed on the operational changes we've made to the plant, and then I'll dive into the proposed modifications that will be going in front of council at the end of the month. Just a brief background. In 2012, we did the assessment and preliminary design of the tertiary filtration replacement project. In 2013, we completed final design, and in 2014, we awarded a construction contract. The scope of work was generally to replace or demolish the old system and replace it with a new microfiltration system, including all of the ancillary facilities for chemical cleaning and associated piping. We rehabilitated our recycled water system reservoir, and we also did improvements to the storm drain system. During construction, it was determined that some wrong feed water quality was in the bid documents, which required us to procure new membranes in order to treat the water. It delayed startup, and it also, we had to revise our specifications. Originally, it was a 3 million gallon per day plant. That's what we were supposed to be able to treat, and we had to reduce it to 2.5 million gallons per day. We were able to start up the facility on November 2nd, 2015, and we had some problems with that because we were not able to reliably produce any more than 0.7 million gallons per day at that time. We worked with both the contractor and the designer to try to resolve this. However, we were unsuccessful, and we went and hired Trestle Technologies back in June 2015. Initially, they were going to support us for 8 weeks. This was to provide operational support to optimize water production, and they were also going to evaluate the system capacity. At that time, you may recall, we had already asked our recycled waters users to minimize their usage of it. We prevented new customers from connecting to the system, and we also worked with Montecito Country Club on their landscaping plan, all trying to be able to reduce the need for augmentation with potable water while we were trying to optimize recycled water production. Back in September, I talked about the operational changes that we had made over the summer from the time we hired Trestle in June through September. I talked a lot about the cleaning protocols, the programming changes, backwash system, and our coagulant system, as well as some of the process changes that we made at El Estero. I'm going to briefly go through some of these just to refresh your memory. We have two types of cleaning processes for the tertiary system. We have mini cleans and full cleans.
Mini cleans are basically, we do an alkaline clean, which is to help with the biological fouling, and we also do an acid clean, which is to help with the inorganic fouling. Initially, when we put the plant into production, both of those cleans were on run time. So every 48 hours we did an alkaline clean. Every 96 hours we did an acid clean. We weren't able to change any of those times. They just triggered automatically, and that caused cleaning to happen all times of the day. What we ended up doing, and as an end result, working with Trussell, we started cleaning more frequently than what was originally set up. So instead of every 48 hours for alkaline clean, we started doing those daily. We also changed the time that we did those cleanings. We did them at night when productivity or the feed water coming into the plant was at its minimum in order to try to maximize production during the day when we had a lot of flow that we could put into the plant. Similarly, with the acid cleans, every 96 hours on runtime was changed to every 3 days at night, and that helped with, again, the same type of, we're able to produce more water and when flow was low. We also had the full cleans, which is a much more intense clean. They were originally programmed monthly. We changed it to every 3 weeks, and we rotate the skids through. So once every 3 weeks, the skid goes through a full clean, which also happens at night. What we saw from just changing all of this frequency of cleanings was far less fouling and an increase in chemical cleaning. When we talked about the backwash system, backwashing is done every 20 or so minutes. We weren't getting, initially it was done based on 8,500 gallons going through the system. And we used just air and water. We would use air to bump the particles out and water to flush it. We changed it to a more agitation type of cleaning, so we would use both air and water to dislodge the solids and then flush them out. And we were able to change from every 8,500 gallons to 1,100 gallons, which is 11,000 gallons, which is far less frequent, and it required far less water to do so. So what that did for us is it allowed us to increase the recovery and be able to produce more water. The next thing we did is we installed a coagulant system. The coagulant is to help with the colloidal fouling. Those are those very small particle matters that get caught up in the membranes and actually block them. Introducing a coagulant prior to the filtration, we were able to start clumping those particles together so that they stayed on the outside of the membrane and didn't block it. We haven't been highly successful with this system yet, but we are hopeful that once we do the modifications and we put it back into, we're not really needing it right now, we put it back into to process in the summer when we'll need it more, that we'll be able to get it more dialed in. And then we made a lot of changes to Elastero process. As you know, we have limited operational abilities to do stuff. That's why we're doing the secondary process improvements. What we have done is started running the plant very aggressively, meaning we are pushing the limits and starting to partially nitrify. And what we're doing with that is getting a much better effluent out of our secondaries to feed the recycled water plant, and that has really helped with production. All in all, we're able to produce 1.5 million gallons per day reliably in the summer. We had one fouling event where we were needing to augment with potable water for a couple of days, but it was very successful. We went back to council in September, and we recommended and council approved increasing Trussell's current contract to continue supporting us with operational needs, as well as to help us with how we move forward to get to the 2.5 MGD reliably. We're now at that point where we're ready to go back to council and recommend award of a contract to do proposed modifications to the system. This will include installing 42 new membranes. Right there, you're going to see skid number 1, and we have the 58 membranes that you'll see already lined up there, and then you'll see some open space on your right. That's where we'll be putting 14 new membranes per skid, so a total of 42, to help increase production. It's a little counterintuitive how 14 membranes per skid is going to give us another 1 million gallons per day of production, and it's all in the details, and that's part of the reason why I recapped our September presentation. The adding of the membranes alone is going to really give us an increase of from about 600 gallons per minute to 850 gallons per minute, just kind of on its face value. However, when talking about how the cleanings affect us, we're cleaning at a point at night, a 12-hour period from 12 to 6 a.m., where we're only running one skid. And when we're doing that right now, we're getting about 0.86 MGD through that one skid. When we fill out that skid completely, we'll have about 1.2 MGD that we'll be able to produce. So at nighttime, we're going to be able to produce more. Similarly, during the daytime, we're going to be able to produce more because we'll just be putting more through the membranes. We constantly backwash. We're backwashing between 18 and 25 minutes each skid. So almost constantly we have a skid in backwash. So when we're getting more production out of that skid, that's how you're incrementally getting up to your 2.5. In addition, we'll be constructing a recirculation piping line. What that's going to do is take basically a 3-inch line that's going to come from your backwash discharge, and we're going to put one on each skid. They're going to go into a common 10-inch header, and then it'll be piped back to the front of the strainers. Originally, or the feed pumps. Originally, that water would be going to drain. It would go back to the front of El Estero. Now that water's going right back into the recycled water plant. So you'll be pushing more water at the front of the plant. You'll be reducing what you're wasting to drain. And those two modifications will get us to 2.5 million gallons per day. In addition, we'll be installing chemical heaters in our chemical tanks. Everything cleans better when it's hot, just like your dishwasher. This is the same kind of concept. We're going to be putting those heaters in the tank. A lot of programming changes with all of the new membranes, all of the recirculation piping. We're going to have to do a lot of changes with the programming. At the end, they'll be doing a 14-day acceptance test, proving that we'll be able to reliably produce 2.5 million gallons per day. We are going to be going to council with a sole source recommendation. Reason being is timeline. Obviously, we've got the drought, and recycled water is an important water supply to the city. We need to make sure that we can meet summer demands, and we need to ensure that we are at 2.5 million gallons per day. We don't want to be doing any blending. The reason we're going to be sole sourcing to Stanek Constructors, they are experienced. They're a general contractor. They are mobilized and on site for our secondary process improvements project. Therefore, we're going to be saving time and money because they're already there. They actually were the contractor that was able to fix the piping that we had the piping failure back in November. They fixed it very quickly, had us back up and running from the time we said go in about 2 weeks. And they've performed well. They did our Headworks Improvements project a few years ago and completed that work nearly a year in advance of the schedule. So we're very confident that Stanek will get the work done on time and will be able to move forward with a good summer. The cost for this, construction cost is a little over $450,000 with change order of $45,000. We'll be procuring the membranes directly from Dow at a little over $75,000 for the 42 membranes. We have construction management through M&S Engineers. They were the original construction managers on the tertiary project. They're there still for the secondary. up to $35,000 for them. And then also project management from city staff up to $30,000. So we're expecting a $641,000 project cost. And in order to pay for that, we've got a $4.25 million in the desalination operational budget for fiscal year 17. We'll be asking for a transfer from that project to the capital fund in order to pay for this. If all goes well, we should be producing 2.5 million gallons per day before the start of summer. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that have to do with the operational improvements that we've made, as well as the proposed modifications.
Mr. Chairman, in the list of expenses that you just showed, I didn't see any ongoing involvement of Trussell. Will they continue to be involved?
Absolutely. We still have a lot of budget remaining from our contract amendment in September, so we're very hopeful that we will be able to have them see us through without having to increase their contract.
Thank you.
Just to make a comment on the costs, it'd be kind of nice to see, like, in this table format, all the costs added up. It's kind of hard to, like, piece them together just looking at the recommendation section.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioners, I do apologize for not producing the council agenda report in advance. It just was not prepared and available for review, so I do apologize.
Yeah, you can see us all frantically reading through it.
I know.
I had a question about operational issues. So I just want to make sure, like, I'm glad that we're going to get this thing to where it needs to be. It is a fair amount of money, but compared to the overall cost of the project, I think it's reasonable. But I want to make sure that what we're doing now is going to work for us as far as, like, operational issues go. Because I know we were spending a lot more time backwashing and doing a lot more work out there to get this to where it needs to be. Is doing these improvements going to help that, or are we still going to have that continual operational issue?
Mr. Chair, that's a great question. Yes, until we finish with the secondary process improvements and we start nitrifying, I would expect we will have to continue running the plant the way we are, continue chemical cleans just as we are. Once we have feed water that is different, we may be able to back down on some of this. That would be our greatest hope.
Okay. Questions?
Thank you. I definitely appreciate all the work you all have done to get this up and running. So I guess I've got a few questions. So the original plan was 58 membranes equaling 2.5 million gallons per day. Now we're saying an additional 42 membranes will give us an additional 1 million gallons per day. So I guess that number doesn't seem that off, but it just kind of brings me back to the fact that the original contractor, I guess the question is, 14 days doesn't seem like a long time for an acceptance test. What happens if in a year from now we're at this exact same place and these new membranes aren't working, something else happens? Is there something we can put in this contract where Stanek is on the line so that they're paying for anything that, if this isn't working much longer than 14 days?
That is an excellent question. I'm not sure that I can actually answer that at this time because I think we would have to look at it very closely and determine if that was feasible to do. We are directing them to do this work.
Yeah. I just would hate to spend another $650 million or $650,000 and not have what we thought we'd have well over a year ago. And then I guess I had a question, a simple question. What's the fuel source for the heater?
Electricity?
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can have that be renewable from either the fuel cells or using some other type of process heat from the plant that's generated at those
Our cogeneration facility, it doesn't bifurcate how and where it sends the electricity. back into the system. I think we're at somewhere around 70, 80, I'd have to check with plant staff, percent of how much is of the plant's electricity is generated by the cogen system. So to answer your question directly, no, I can't specifically bifurcate it out and have it by something else. These are just tank heaters. So
Yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking about the electricity being bifurcated out. I get that. It was more, I know that the cogen's facilities produce heat. So is there a way, and I know some of that heat is already being used in another process,
Okay,
but is there
as-
excess heat that we could then use from that cogen facility to use there?
I've never thought of it in that respect. We're putting them back in as as designed. So I don't know if we could and have the luxury right now to make that change. But as we look at things moving forward, we can definitely look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's going to increase the electricity draw on the facility, so that would probably be a good thing to take into account. I know Mr. Dewey was here last month to talk about renewables, and I'm not sure if that was factored in. But and then I didn't quite understand how we are pulling desal funds to pay for this. I'd like a little more on that too.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we had budgeted this year $4.2 million for the operation of the desal plant. Under the approach that this plant would be operating in October. The fact that it hasn't been operating has been a recognized savings in those operational costs. That the savings is roughly about $2 million. And so when we looked at, obviously that money would go back to reserves because it was not spent. We hope and anticipate desal being online this year, so there will be some operational costs, but we do believe there will be ultimately a savings. And so what we are doing is appropriating money that we had set aside for operating the desal plant and using that funding to finance the modifications here to the facility.
Sorry, a couple more. We currently subsidize recycled water users in our rates. I'm assuming we're going to come and see rates again in the next month or two. No, maybe. Are we seeing, whenever we see rates again?
March.
Okay, yeah. I'd like to see what it looks like that they're actually accepting the full cost of these facilities and the operations. As Chair mentioned, the operating costs have obviously increased as well. So just as we're getting, it's not fair to put the costs of the recycled water on our other users anymore. I realize that there used to be a huge benefit, but at this point, with so many issues, I think we need to understand the full cost of that. And then I always ask this question, so I will ask it again. Wondering if we are at a place we can talk about recourse with the original contractor and if there's any potential to get reimbursement for some of these costs or anything like that.
We do have someone here from the attorney's office who can share the current status of that.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'm Tava Ostringer, Assistant City Attorney, and handling the construction aspect of the Ellisdale Tertiary Plant. And unfortunately, at this time, we are not at liberty to speak to you about cost recovery. Oh, thank you. Or potential litigation claims. I can tell you that we are looking at all options. Like you, we want to make sure that the city is protected and that we get a plant that produces. So I will tell you that we have closed out our contract with our original contractor. That's why we are going forward with Stanek. But with regards to any future claims or potential claims, we will come back to you as soon as we have something definite that we can provide to you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Is this where Commissioner Burney wanted to talk about the Baptist Church?
Yeah, let's do this one first, and then we can circle back to that one. Did you have questions?
So apparently I'm just going to be grouchy about dollars today. So, when you look back on this project, when does recycling, other than the obvious benefit of you're not putting water out into the bay, that's really the only silver lining in the cloud I see right now. but you're gonna put another over $500,000 towards this. You've got staff time, you've got increased maintenance up till now. I'm assuming with the addition of this equipment, you have increased lifetime maintenance costs that weren't anticipated before. You've got 42 new things, plus this, plus that. You've got increased El Estero expenses to better prep the feed water. So, I mean, when does the bottom line just not work for recycling?
Mr. Kilburn, Chairman, we are looking at this in the sense that I'm hoping we can recover some of these costs as a part of the design errors. That's what I'm hopeful for. I can't confirm that, but I still believe that Recycle Water Community does have a role to play, at least a significant role to play until potable reuse is an option for us. I agree the costs have been certainly much more than we have anticipated, but like I said, I don't think we'll be made 100% whole, but I'm hoping we will be able to recover some of these costs that have been associated with trying to get the facility back to what we had originally set out and paid for.
So I guess my request would be that when we get down to Commissioner Burney's request of talking about actual costs versus subsidized costs for recycled, and we are unsuccessful in recouping any or 100% of some of these categories that I just listed, which I'm sure there's more, that we actually see a real accounting for the costs that have, the hard dollar costs and the in-house costs that have occurred up till now, of all the adjustments we've had to make. I mean, somebody's being burdened with these costs, and right now we're so far into this, you can't even put a finger on it. It's just a cost to be built into a future rate because you've had expenses, and it's unfortunate, but I think eventually it'd be nice to know that accounting.
Yes, and I think revisiting the mindset that went behind recycled water, in particular, why it is subsidized, why we want to encourage the use of it, and why we want to get people off of more valuable potable water. We certainly can revisit that policy direction and talk about it. The ideal time to really bring that around would be the long-term water supply plan, but certainly we could probably approach it earlier if we need to and talk about why we might want to change the cost formula for that. We do have, agreements with our recycled water customers to provide them, but currently the policy is that the council ultimately sets those rates, and so there is the ability to adjust that in the future.
And just so I'm clear, there's a huge value in not putting water out in wastewater out into the bay. So $1.5 million, $2.5 million, whatever it is that you can keep from going out of the bay, I think is good. But I think rather than the kind of solve the world's problem perspectives, I would like the conversation to be a clear one, that it's a policy decision with a cost, and we agree that that's what we want to do, rather than nobody talks about the cost but just goes off on this save the world thing to recycle water. I mean, I think there's clearly enough support. Well, in my opinion, the increased cost is worth recycling the water, but it's a hard sell when you can't tell people what that cost is. So that's just where I'd like to be. I'd like to wave that flag, but it's not easy to wave that flag when you just, a year from now, you've got 3 years worth of stuff that went on and you can't put a finger on it anymore how you got there. So,
Mr. Chair, this discussion gets broader and broader off of the topic that we have, but rightfully so, because we keep walking around the long-term water supply plan and the pieces that we keep talking about. We're talking desal, we're talking recycle, we're talking groundwater, and we keep walking around. We're in an emergency and we need to maximize. And as Commissioner Jordan said, you add all these things up. What is when we get to the March discussion of rates, we're just looking right now, and how does that then play out over the next 5 years or 10 years in terms of rates and where we're going? It all comes back to the long-term water supply plan, and we keep saying we can't get to that until after the drought. But in fact, we're actually piecemealing it as we go because we're taking on large financial and operational requirements today, right? And then it's going to rain, and then people are going to say, how come you did all these things? So a real large discussion of where are we and how all this stuff is going forward. The commission has to have that discussion sooner rather than later. And because we're walking around how did we get to recycle? Well, we had water supply, we had water demand of 16,000 acre feet, and we were pushing our supply at the time, and this was a supply back in the 90s that essentially was a supply part of the long-term water supply plan to fill the need. But all these other things are happening. So again, again, this is, like I say, the discussion keeps kind of going in concentric circles of the bomb, and the bomb was the drought, and now we're looking at the after effects. But frankly, we need to start building that long-term water supply plan and having those discussions. I'd really like to have those discussions here at the commission, deal with as much as the technical things we can on the consent calendar in that regard, so that we have the real discussion of the real thing. It's the big picture of where we're going for the community, and they're not in the weeds like we are. So again, it's editorial comment more than anything else. I think we're going to have to have a very strong PR in the community to explain what's happening with the rates while it's raining, and we have all these facilities. And you think you have a problem with recycle? Wait till all those things add up and see where we're at. Which leads me to then the big question is, right? I think we ought to have a discussion fairly soon that talks about, at least the framework of where we're going. Desal, recycle, imported water, and potable reuse. Because I see potable reuse from everything I can line up here, it's decades away for us. We're going to take on so much debt today, we're not going to get there. So we can't keep talking about potable reuse, but is that really going to be an option within the near horizon to be within a long-term water supply plan within a decade? Let's have that discussion sooner rather than later. That's where I'm at. So these are all great, Michael, and I appreciate, how did we get all this recycle stuff here? Well, historically, if you're in the 90s, I can tell you, right, this was the next brightest thing coming down the line to allow a planning commission to continue to approve projects. So I could go on, but anyway, I'll stop there.
What I would say too, you look in the past 4 or 5 years and how recycled water has helped our water supply and get us to where we are today. So we actually aren't out of water right now. So but yeah, there are definitely costs associated with that. Okay, all right. Let's we need to make a recommendation to send this to council.
I'll make a recommendation.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. So we will move on to consent item, or move back to consent item 5D. And we can discuss that.
Sure, I can jump in since I asked that to be removed. And I think this is symptomatic of what Commissioner Davis was just talking about. This shouldn't be a big thing, but when I read through everything that's going on, and we've got somebody else applying to be a recycled water customer, there's a couple concerns I have. The first one is having water to provide for them. The last 2 years, we've had concerns about having adequate recycled water to provide, and I don't feel like we should approve a project unless we are 110% sure we will have recycled water to provide for them. So that's one concern. And then the other is this long-term planning. We know there are costs for First Baptist Church. They're going to have to put in a purple pipe, and we've committed to certain rates historically. And what I don't want to do is sit here today and say, yes, you can have you can have recycled water at this certain rate, and you're going to have this certain costs, these capital costs to make that happen. And then in 2 years or even 5 years, come back to them and say, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to go forward with direct potable reuse, or we found another better use for this water, or alternatively, we're also talking about, I think we'll talk about this in the next area, not just not having lawn watering, but also no outdoor irrigation at all. So are they making these big expenses and thinking that they're going to get discounted rates on recycled water, and we're sitting here thinking that we might change that path? And I don't know if anybody is here from First Baptist, but I don't want to approve a project without them having the full story and without us being 100% sure that all of the water that they will get will be recycled. Those are my concerns.
So we have shared with them the fact that, we are working to make modifications to the plant, and that this agreement could be contingent on those modifications going through. On staff side, we feel pretty confident with our plan to make the modifications, and the fact that we did make it through last summer with very minimal use of any potable water. I believe it's, fully the discretion of the Water Commission if they would prefer that we not. I'm absolutely fine with that. This is just, another opportunity to get someone off of the potable water system, but keeping in mind that under our current regulations, they cannot water their turf. So they've obviously, that's not a huge loss in water at this point. They already can't water their turf. And this has been an agency or an organization that we have courted for many years to try to get them onto recycled water. And it's not until we have banned the watering of turf that has brought them around to become customers. So I am certainly open to what the Water Commission wants to do on this. We have, under our current policy, it has always been to, if there's someone adjacent to our recycled water system, to try and get them connected. There's certainly a lot of momentum right now to get people connected long term, to get them off of our potable water. As Commissioner Davis said, I do believe it will be years before we get potable reuse. And as we've talked about before, potentially potable reuse going into our recycled water system as we as a community grow comfortable with our ability to treat that water to those high standard water quality standards. And so I anticipate next month I will be coming back and providing a presentation on where we ended with potable reuse, where the technical advisory panel ended. And that's all in anticipation of making that presentation again to the regional board in May. So I'm happy to follow what the Water Commission would like to do with this.
How much do we anticipate their water use is going to be? I mean, I suspect it's probably not going to be too substantial.
Yeah, I imagine it's less than an acre foot, but I can confirm that.
Yeah, I mean, I see Commissioner Bernie's point is I'm in favor of doing this just on my end. I think it's good to get them off of the potable system, and because they're not going to be a giant water user, I don't think it's a huge deal. But I see her point about, where are we going? We definitely are going to continue to add recycled water customers, supposedly, or maybe. But, I don't know if we're going to get to a point where we were last summer when La Cumbre wanted to join. They would have been a much larger water user. And just making sure that we have the supplies to, handle that demand is critical. So, I mean, once the recycled water plant is up and running and fully optimized and producing more water than we can get rid of, then I think we just need to make sure we, take a look at it on a project by project, or customer by customer basis. Any other comments?
Does it, when somebody does this, do they end up with redundant supply? Does their potable water system still exist? And if we, for some reason, can't supply recycled or don't want to, that they still have potable source to irrigate? Do they just run side by side?
They do have to sever the two, and so if they go with recycled water, our current agreement has that we will provide them water, and if we do not have recycled, we would provide them potable, but we have added language in here that limits our requirement to provide them water. If it's going to be longer than so many days, we may just shut off the recycled water system entirely. And so that is a new element that we are adding to the agreements. There are requirements that if recycled water right now is not available, then it is the city's expense that we reconnect them to the potable water system.
Is that a big expense, or is it just a pipe out there in the dirt?
I think it might be more complicated than we think to try and go back, particularly if some were never connected. It may be a little more
But
complicated.
in this particular case, comparatively, it'd be simple then, right?
Yeah, it should
Okay,
be.
okay, because really all you're doing is just somebody's putting a new pipe in the ground and running it up to the existing intake and connecting that and disconnecting the other one, right? Capping it off.
Well, they'll be continuing to I'm assuming with this property, they probably have a potable landscape meter. That's probably what they have. So yes, it'd probably be
Okay,
straightforward.
thanks.
So you mentioned that there's something in here that said if we can't provide them with potable or with recycled, there's an option to. So I guess my thought was that we actually would put something in here that said if there's not enough recycled water, you might not get water.
Period.
Period.
Right.
And know that we are discussing not subsidizing recycled water anymore, so that those things are clear, both to the public and to the end user. Because and I thought it was interesting what you said. If we could maybe supply it for a couple days, but this is irrigation. I don't grass isn't, and plants especially or Mediterranean plants shouldn't be dying in a couple days. If we can't supply recycled water, we just shouldn't be supplying anything.
Right. Yeah.
Especially for a couple days. But for old users, I get that there's kind of a long-standing contract. And I guess that's more what I'm looking for is really making sure people understand where we are in terms of our water supply, recycled water costs as they enter into these agreements. That if we hit a point in the summer where we can't supply potable water or recycled water for a week, they might not get water for a week.
Correct.
So I guess those two things would make me more comfortable approving this or recommending approval of this.
Mr. Chair.
ordinance.
Ms. Bernie, how about if you made a motion that we recommend the council moving forward with this with inclusion of those particular points in the final contract? You want to make that motion?
Sure. So I'll move that we recommend council adoption of the ordinance with the addition of two items. One, letting the user First Baptist Church know that we are considering not subsidizing recycled water rates. Oh, it sounds like we might have a question. Sorry. Go.
Sorry to interrupt. Assistant City Attorney Sarah Connect. If I could just interrupt on this just a minute, I would prefer and just request that as opposed to taking it to City Council with the addition of a request to add language to these are template type agreements that we work on and use for multiple type projects. So I would just request that we postpone this item and give staff an opportunity to take it back and consider your proposals, which I'm not saying are bad, but I think staff needs an opportunity to think about that. And, particularly when it comes to rates and that whole discussion is, a big one. So let us take it back, work on it a little bit longer. Ms. Ward, who works on these, is not here today, and I'd like to have the opportunity to discuss that with her. So if Mr. Hagmark is okay, if we could just make a motion to postpone, think about that, come back, work on it a little bit more, I would.
I think given the
appreciate
discussion, I'm happy. I mean, if the Water Commission wanted this to go away until our recycled water modifications were done, that would be one thing that I guess if you want us to just go ahead and take the input that you gave today and bring it back and see if we can't accommodate that, we can certainly do that too. I mean, I think that have two different avenues there.
I'm fine with you bringing it back at the next meeting if we can just have those small adjustments put in there.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. If we're going to continue to try and attract additional recycled water customers, this probably won't be the last time this comes up either, so we should get what we think is appropriate format established.
Yes, we'll bring back, I think, a broader discussion on this. Has kind of been on our list of things to talk about, and maybe we just need to bring it back. I don't know if we'll make it back necessarily in February, but we'll bring back a broader item to discuss recycled water customers, and then along with it, this agreement.
Mr. Chair, motion to continue this item, staff to bring it back when it's ready.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll,
Can I just make another comment on that too? Somebody said that, and that resonated with me. I think you said it, is that the festering problem with recycled is, for as long as I can remember, we're not producing more than the need, and that should be our goal. We should be in a position where we have excess production recycled, because that then begins to answer the question on why other than because it's the right thing to do, but then why we're offering a subsidy area for that. That's because we have it available, rather than we're constantly increasing our subsidy through all these issues and then still trying to give it to people. But that should, to me, that's the crux of the problem, is it's a supply and demand kind of issue, and we should have more supply than there is demand out there, and that should be our carrot then to subsidize it, because it's both the right thing to do and we have it to give away. We're kind of working from down in a hole on this thing for as long as I can remember. So I just say, when we want to talk about that big picture thing that Dave was talking about, I think that has to be one of the conversations, is how do we get to that point where it's not always a burden to us to supply, other than because it's the right thing to do. That's our concession for the rate and the subsidy. But the rest of it is, we've got it available, and so we always have it available, and so that way we can give it to you at a cheaper rate.
And we can discuss, it's the facility will be taken down for maintenance here and there, so there will always be that need for some blending. We anticipate it being very small, and you'll notice in even the water supply management report for this month, we can talk about, I hate to paint it in too bad of a picture. I mean, we made it through last summer with just literally talking about several acre feet of blending for, the hundreds of acre feet that were produced. And so, the mindset going forward is there will be some level of blending, and we can talk about that. I hope that we can reduce the salts in our wastewater, and that will allow us at least even more flexibility to not have to blend. But I think bringing this back for a much more detailed discussion, including how we even started with a recycled water plant and what its intended purpose was, because it was intended as the next cheapest source of water, and that's the discussion that I think we need to kind of loop around and talk about it from the beginning.
that would be great. Thank you. Okay, I guess we'll move on to item 6C. A lollygag so they can take a break and come back with a drought update and annual water supply management report, or just a drought update.
It's
Right?
just, yes, this, the agenda that you got that's going to council, they have not seen the water supply management report. So that's what's going to them on Tuesday. However, the Water Commission has seen it and has provided some great comments on it. And so we're going to just provide a drought update today. Lots of stuff to talk about. It has been a very eventful month since we've last met. So we'll be going over the drought status, demands, water supply status. We'll be talking about Gibraltar, Kachuma, imported water, how recent rains have and have not helped us, and then water supply strategy going forward. Touch on drought funding. We continue to seek out and try and bring in some funding to help offset some of these costs, and of course where we are with water conservation. I hesitate to get too far ahead without our other commissioners here. But so rainfall for the water year. Darn, I updated this today. How come that's not in there? Anyway, I was looking at this morning. Gibraltar Reservoir is at 93% of normal. The Kachuma is at 8 inches. Now, again, this is as of the 17th. We do have updated totals. We got roughly about an inch from the event last night, and so these numbers will be going up. In general, Santa Barbara is looking really good. Downtown Santa Barbara, Gibraltar is not quite at normal. But we anticipate the storms over the next few days are actually going to turn that around.
Josh, can I ask a question? What is normal? Is that average? Is that median? What
That
is
would be average. That would be the typically for Gibraltar, we see about 28 inches of rain in an annual year.
So it's
but
it's the average.
it is an average, and I think maybe we could probably spend some time at some point talking about the average because I think, what is it? Kachuma has spilled 20 times in its entire lifetime. So you just kind of giving an event. We have this period of 60 to 70 years there, 60 years that we've had Kachuma and it's spilled 20 times. We have basically feasts and famines, right? That's really what this area is most notably sees for its water supply. And so it is, 4 or 5 years without rain and then this excessive rainstorm and then nothing for a few more years. So hopefully we're coming off of that years without rain and get it into a few wet years here. But who's to know? We still have NOAA here predicting below average rainfall for our area. Again, they were wrong last year. I'm hoping they're wrong this year. But this is what their 3-month forecast looks like for January, February, March. So I got 2 graphics here. I just wanted to show, basically Santa Barbara County into Ventura County is currently remains in the most extreme drought situation right now. Here we are in Santa Barbara, and we have benefited from some of these storms. It's certainly a lot more than we've seen over the last 5 years, but we haven't benefited as much as the rest of the state. Just kind of showing what has happened, though, over the last 3 months, where a big portion of the Central Valley has improved in its situation. And so I remain hopeful, just looking at the storms kind of queued up over the next few days, that our conditions will continue to improve. And like I said, it's much better than we've seen. As far as community conservation, we hit 36% for December, which I consider to be pretty exceptional, given that there isn't a whole lot of demand typically in December. Our target, though, is 40%. So we got a long ways to go still to get to that 40% conservation. As we've talked about, this is going to be quite an effort if it does remain dry to achieve that 40%. It is difficult during these times to be able to tell that because typically most people turn down their irrigation this time of year, but that's currently where we stand. Supply status. We're going to go through each one of our supplies. I apologize I was able to get the information updated for today's meeting on this because we did get some rainfall last night. So Gibraltar, we did see some runoff. You might remember that we did release the remaining water in Gibraltar by November. We pretty much had it zeroed out. And so we've gotten about 700 acre feet of runoff. We got about 200 to 300 acre feet last night. And I expect we will see substantially more over the next few days, given that they're predicting a 2-inch event on Friday, I think it is, and another one on Monday. So this is fantastic, and it's only January. And I think it's worth kind of stepping back and talking about it won't take much, and we do anticipate Gibraltar could spill fairly quickly, keeping in mind that the watershed that feeds Gibraltar is massive. Nearly half the watershed that goes into Kachuma passes through Gibraltar. And to kind of give that 216 square miles and put it into perspective, the city of Santa Barbara encompasses about 21 square miles of land. So literally 10 times the size of the city drains into Gibraltar. And so we'll be watching that closely, but I am very optimistic that we'll see vast improvements in the amount of water in Gibraltar over the next few days. Water quality challenges become our next problem. Right now, that 784 acre feet that's sitting in there is not something we feel comfortable treating. It's really high in sediment. likely contributable to the burn areas of the Ray Fire. And so it's likely to take a few months for that water to settle to a point where we feel like we can treat it. I find that very frustrating, and been talking with staff about potentially a long-term project where we may need to do some type of subsurface intake of some sort so that we can start utilizing that water, because ideally you'd want to start pulling water, like to shut down all the wells and start pulling all the water from there, making space for any future inflows. So this is something we're taking a look at. I think there's, the feasibility of it. We'll take a look and see what the costs are, but certainly maybe some advantages to it, given that the reservoir will continue to silt in and we're facing continued silt and water quality issues before we could even treat it.
Mr. Chair. Joshua, when's your update going to go to council?
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday? Assuming we get two major, rain events, on Tuesday you'll probably try to update these numbers for council?
I will. the draft presentation is due to them on Friday, but I will likely try.
They're going to ask the question, obviously.
Yeah,
So
right.
if you do update it, could you send us the PowerPoint?
Yes.
And again, just for us, we could watch it online also, just to see your updated numbers.
Yeah.
What's the status of the pass-through agreement again? Is this a good time to ask that question?
I didn't have it in my presentation today. But I at least talk to the Bureau on a monthly basis, and I have Bill Ferguson talking to them probably on a weekly basis. And we are still waiting for the EA, the environmental assessment, to be finalized. They had promised us they'd have it done by Thanksgiving, and they said they'd have it done by holidays, and then now we're still waiting on it. Very frustrating. They believe they have everything they need, is what we're hearing from them. And so as soon as that's done, they have shared with us their Warren Act agreement, and so we have some comments on that we're getting back to them. But not likely that it will be in place at all to help us out this year.
Okay. Question?
In terms of the water quality at Gibraltar, are we still seeing elevated total organic carbon as well as just the silt?
At this point, the turbidity is really the issue. I don't know if it's the TOCs, but the turbidity was like 150 NTU right now. It's just pretty thick, yeah.
I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. You're 21 square miles of the city, which is, when you look in the charts, it says the city's 21 square miles. 10 of those are in the ocean.
Well, this is funny because we had a good discussion internally about this. The square miles of the city is actually 42 if you include the portion in the ocean and the airport. If you're looking just at the city proper, it's 21.
Okay.
Yeah, great catch. Lake Cachuma, it's sitting at just over 9% right now, and lots of things going on with Lake Cachuma. So let me walk you through that. Emergency pump barge. There was a meeting yesterday to talk about the fact that as the lake, we start to get some inflow, starts to come up, there is a point in which the pipeline will come loose from the piles because it will come up so high that this facility actually needs to be moved back to the original site. But if the reservoir is coming up quickly, it won't be in that site very long before we have to move it before that site gets submerged where all the power is. So this is going to be something that we're going to be watching very closely. And unfortunately, it's a careful balancing act, and even more reason why we need to have Gibraltar to help ensure that we have potentially a water supply if the barge gets interrupted for any reason. So as of the end of December, the city used up its last of the water that originated from the San Ynez River. That was water that was allocated to us in 2015. That's a long time ago. We were able to stretch that water out. But now the only water remaining in the lake belonging to the city is the water that we have purchased and or state water that we've imported. The new evaporation formula that we've been talking about did take effect January 1st. This, as you may recall, spreads out the evaporation amongst most of the water in the lake. It does not apply to the downstream users, but it does apply to the minimum pool, which is now the most significant body of water in the lake. Inflows. I wanted to remind the Water Commission, because this is a very complicated issue, I'm trying to boil it down to something simple. As water starts to accumulate in the lake, unless there is a live stream below the dam, there's key spots along the river where we monitor flows. If there is not an active live stream, the water that flows in the lake belongs to the downstream users. So we very well could get 20,000 acre feet of water that flow into this lake, and it all belongs to the downstream users. The South Coast, the project members get nothing. Keep in mind that the lake was constructed to hold water that would have ended up in the ocean. And that is the water that is divvied up amongst the project members. And so as we talk about it, because I'm sure you'll get asked, well, how much water do we need in Kachuma? It's a very complicated, it's not a straightforward answer as to how much water. I do believe that if we get water in Gibraltar and Gibraltar fills and spills, I think the city is in a position to probably have at least a year's worth of water. And then it comes down to how quickly can we get access and use that water given the sediment and water quality issues. I think that's what we'll be wrestling with. But I'll continue to update you on this. This is going to be this thing is changing daily, and so it's challenging to stay on top of. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just a quick little question. So if the pass-through agreement was in effect, does that water then still stay the cities and under those conditions go down?
That is correct. A portion.
Yeah, correct.
A portion. I think the maximum that we would get is about 3,000 acre feet of water flowing in, but Gibraltar spilling would start that clock, yeah. So imported water, this has been a fun turn of events. The city has about 5,500 acre feet of water sitting in San Luis right now that we had planned for delivery. Currently, the state water allocation is at 45%. And we anticipate it will go up given how much water they've gotten in northern and central California. But we have no reason to believe it'll go to 100%. I think there's been 1 year where we've gotten 100% in the last 18 years, 17 years. So we're not getting any indication from DWR that should be planning for 100% this year. In January, though, CCW notified all of its members that San Luis reservoir was projected to spill. The spill, I put in quotes because it's a paper spill. Basically, any water that is stored in the lake has secondary rights to that storage. Primary rights go to the current year's water allocation. And so what happens is any water in the lake gets converted over to current year allocation and reallocated to the State Water Project members. So what we are facing as early as February 1st, maybe the second or third week in February, is that the city's 5,500 acre feet of water could disappear. Certainly we understood that was always a risk, but I don't think we believe the reservoir could spill this quickly. And I'll kind of go into what's driving some of this with some of the rainfall. City's stored water can't be physically moved to Kachuma fast enough. We've been talking about those conveyance limitations for a while, and we've got that pipeline full and running to Kachuma now, but there's no way that there's about 30,000 acre feet of stored water through CCWA that's sitting in San Luis. The city has about 5,500 of that. So that water's at risk, and for there's a lot of obviously other California state contractors that have water there too that is also at risk. We just happen to still be in the worst drought situation still. Everyone else seems to have gotten some reprieve right now. So record rainfall in northern central California is what's driving this, and DWR has been able to run the pumps at full capacity. And so wanted to kind of show these graphics. This is the California DWR publishes these. And we've talked about this before. This is the 8-station index. So it's basically 8 weather stations that they follow in Northern California, and it uses them to predict runoff. And here we are right here. This is currently the rainfall they've received at the index. This green line here is the wettest year on record which occurred in 82 and 83 in Northern California. So as you can see, so far this rainfall we have gotten has outpaced any rainfall we've received in the past. And this is what is providing the opportunity for those pumps in the Delta to run at maximum capacity. And here's the other part. This is another index for the Central Coast. The Central California, San Joaquin area. This is interesting because one of the challenges in the past has been, Northern California gets a lot of water, but when they run the pumps at full capacity, it reverses the flow of the San Joaquin River. There is so much water right now coming into the San Joaquin River that concern is not there. And so that's enabling them to pump, I want to say I saw something around 14,000 acre feet a day is being able to be pumped into San Luis. And that's in addition to meeting all the other needs. And so folks like Metropolitan Water District are moving all of their stored water in San Luis into reservoirs they have down south. So trying to get that water out of there before it spills. But that's what's kind of set up this unique situation where we're facing, despite things improving, we're facing the potential of losing a valuable supply that we were counting on to meet our needs for this year. Options. I did share with the commission, and I went to council as well. CCWA is requesting that DWR take into consideration our water supply situation and potentially some type of, and not knowing the contract that well, what could they do to try and make the South Coast whole as it relates to our supply situation? I should keep, just for more information, the San Luis Reservoir is actually broken up. There are the feds for the Central Valley Project have capacity in there, and so does the state. The state is basically running out of their capacity, and so as part of the agreement, they're allowed to store some of their capacity in the feds' room in the reservoir. The problem is the feds are also in a similar situation where they believe they're going to spill as well, so we don't believe that it's capacity that will last very long. Groundwater banking, what's really popped up in the last week is, what can we do with our water to try and preserve it? If we are unsuccessful at getting any special accommodations from DWR, potentially banking our water. The best and only deal out there right now is the Irvine Ranch Groundwater Bank. It's in Kern County. And if we stored our water with them, we would be able to get about 40% of that water back. It doesn't cost any money up front, and they would guarantee a third of that water can be returned annually. So as we ran into at Dudley Ridge where they didn't have the capacity to return that, they are guaranteeing we could at least get a third of the water we have stored with them back in any annual year. And then there is a cost to pump that water back out of the ground, and that's what they'd be looking for compensation for those pumping costs, which are about $150 an acre foot.
Mr. Chair, not in a lot of detail, but just real quickly, how does that groundwater banking work in terms of physically taking water down south and spreading it, or how's that work?
If we were to reach an agreement with them, Irvine Ranch would take the water that we have in storage and pull it out of the State Water Project.
Okay.
And for them, I don't know if typically with some of these deals, they actually use that water for their farmers and don't pump their groundwater basin, and it's kind of this in lieu transfer, and that's how we get our water into the ground.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then
Yeah.
And then when we take it out of the state project at some point when it's available?
Yeah, they would. Irvine has pumps that they can pump it into the California Aqueduct, therefore returning it to the state project so we could ask for it back.
Got it. Mm-hmm. But then we're in the capacity limitation in our own pipe.
That would be another story, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the water that we're taking right now, pumping into the lake, are we pulling from our San Luis allocation right now? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to preserve our Table A water for later?
Yeah, our 2017 water would be the last thing we would bring down at this point. Mm-hmm. So because the state has these interesting rules where we are can't buy water directly from other contractors. We always have to do an exchange. We also are sitting on top of 6,400 acre feet of debt that we now owe. We will be returning about 168 acre feet this year to Mojave before the reservoir spills, so we'll be able to pay off that debt. But there currently is no capacity to repay our water to AVEC. And why? Because AVEC has a lot of water in storage in San Luis, and they're having it delivered now, and therefore they don't have any capacity for us to return that. And that's part of the agreement, is that there is capacity to return that water. So we carry that debt forward, yet we lose the water that we have in storage. It's kind of an interesting, so potentially this is a place where DWR could help. They've mandated this need for a transfer or an exchange of water, yet kind of set up this situation where now we're left with no water to repay the debt, and we still have the debt. So that's kind of where this stands.
You keep saying spill in quotations, so what you're saying is that the state's fraction of the storage capacity of San Luis the state would reach that amount, even though the San Luis is not going to physically spill.
Right. Yes, San Luis has really no natural tributaries. It's entirely dependent on water pumped in from the delta. And so once they get up to that storage capacity, water that has been stored or carried over in there they'll start transferring proportionately across whoever has water left in there. Will get transferred over to 2017 water allocation and reallocated. And so it's as if it spilled and went over the dam, is in essence the way they kind of talk about it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We to put it in context, we have similar situations with Cachuma. When Cachuma spills, any water that has been carried over is the first water that goes over the dam, and so it's kind of a resetting of the clock.
Mr. Chair, learning curve for me, sorry. Storing the water we've had up there, do we pay to store the water?
In a way we do, yeah. I mean, it's paid for delivery is really how it's kind of, they get compensated.
So if we lose it, we haven't paid.
We don't pay for delivery costs.
Right, so we would essentially stored that water at that time for no cost. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a nice way to put it.
So of that 5,500 acre feet, what do you think, like realistically, how much do you think we're going to lose? Or how much do you think we're going to be able to pull out before it spills?
I don't have those numbers. Right now we are planning, I think delivery is about 300 acre feet a month is what we're getting out of there. So not a lot. And so the other option that has just popped up is some type of arrangement with Metropolitan Water District. I think the thing comes down to how much money they want for this, but they have the capacity to take the water. And so our thought was, and what we have CCWA is working is, hey, could you take our carryover and exchange, give us some of your 2017 allocation? And so we're also working that to see if that's a viable option, because they have the ability to take it now and they can store it. They have reservoirs down south that still have capacity in them. So I think they would help us out if they can make money and water off of it. So it's really at what price, and is that price better than what Irvine Ranch has to offer? So,
are any of the upstream CCWA users, can we strike up some sort of deal with them too, instead of having them take their state water allocation? Could we
upstream
transfer
or downstream folks?
Upstream, like Solvang, Buellton, Santa Maria.
They're all in the same boat, and they're all going to lose water. Actually, the one that's hurt the most is Montecito. They have 8,000 acre feet of water in storage right now. They were really hedging their bets out into 2020, and so they have a lot of water in there. They're going to lose compared to what their annual demands are.
So everybody's got water in San Luis?
They do.
Okay.
They do. Yeah, like I said, I think there's about 30,000 acre feet of CCWA carryover water stored in the lake right now.
Okay.
So, after that good news, move on to DSAL and wanting to give an update. I did share with you the council report on this, but we did go to council to talk about an increase in the change order for the DSAL project. It brings the total project cost to about $70 million. It does resolve some cost and schedule issues that we've been in negotiations now for a while with IDE, and mainly around unforeseen issues. As we talked about at the council meeting, a lot of these challenges originated from poor documentation of what happened in the 90s, and a telltale sign for why good documentation is important. There were a lot of corners cut. There were a lot of modifications that were done during the last construction, and I can get my head around the modifications and why they had to do it. They were under the gun, and there was an emergency, and they had to get it up and running. And unfortunately, the record drawings that were done did not capture those changes, and unfortunately, that has led to a lot of these additional costs. So, with that, I just kind of wanted to walk through a current status update. So we're going to go through, everyone's familiar with where the desal plant physically is located, the chemical feed station where there's some ongoing work. I'll be talking about that. We're going to be talking about our two intakes out here, which we refer to as A and B, because right now it's looking like we'll be able to get one online and the other one will kind of lag behind. We currently only need one of them on to operate. The second one is a redundancy. And then the brine mixing box. And then not shown on this map is the Padre Pump Station, which is located by the Schott Center near the hospital. So, power distribution, oops, arrow got moved over. Power distribution, that's this facility right here. It is undergoing testing right now, but it is, for all intents and purposes, everything is in physically. These are the admin buildings and the control center. These are existing buildings that they were doing some tenant improvements on, and for the most part, they are near completion, I guess, of the tenant improvements. And right now, they're working on the control center for the most part. Media, the three treatment trains here are all in and awaiting seawater to start maturing the media. They are undergoing some of the testing with potable right now, just circulating potable water through there to test for leaks and confirm all the pumps and controlling works. Post-treatment, this is where the minerals are added back to the water to make it mimic more of the city's normal water supply, and also to make sure that we don't have any potential corrosion issues. That is waiting on seawater to be able to test that. And then we have the finished water distribution tanks and pump station, and that is, again, also waiting for seawater to come on shore so we can start to test that. The chemical feed station, this right here is the intake line. We have now pressure tested that and confirmed it should hold. And so now the electrical for the intake pumps, they have been pulling wire in and the control wire out to the pump stations offshore. And I believe they're supposed to wrap that up this week or next now. That got delayed. And then the chemical additions, we have one of these tanks. There's some older tanks there too, but the tanks are mostly in and now they're plumbing them. And these will be the additives that are added to the water to start prepping it for filtration. The marine work, they have set the new intake lids and screens, so those are on for both intake A and B, and they've installed most of the electrical and communications. It should be, I think, done this week. Remaining is installation of pump A, which should be going in this week, and stabilizing intake facility B. One of the undocumented challenges was during the last construction, they were supposed to put rock riprap around the base of these intake facilities so that we didn't have any issues with erosion. But under intake facility B, it's, I guess, wasn't apparent when we first went down there, but there was a big void underneath it. It's basically sitting on 2 points. It could slip off of those points, and so we're very cautious that not have any, add any extra loads to it for now, and wanting to get that void filled and at least get us to a position where we can start to utilize intake B.
Could you remind us why we have 2 intakes?
The 2 intakes allow us to get up to the full design capacity of 10,000 acre feet. And for now, it's basically a redundancy. But if we were to run the plant at full capacity, we would need both of these without any redundancy.
When it was built back in the 90s, as I recall, we had a existing abandoned sewer outfall, and a PVC pipe was snaked through that. So is that one of the 2?
So yes, we're still using, it's an HDP pipe that was put through an old city sewer outfall, and at the end of that is where these 2 intake structures are that tie into it.
So they both connect to that same pipeline?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
And then startup and testing right now is late January. When it starts up, that's when we start to bring seawater on shore, and then we can start to do a lot of the other process testing. Other work, Padre Pump Station, they're still testing the electrical there. They set the pumps, and they're working on some last distribution system improvements to make that pump station viable. El Estero outfall mixing box. This requires, we had to move where we sample El Estero's wastewater discharge so that we can still get samples of just city wastewater going out, and then there's going to be a commingled sampling station as well. And then a recent modification is we had to put in a larger air gap, because when you have your brine water mixing in there and your wastewater confluence coming together, the overflow box that would keep it from potentially going back to the desal plant isn't big enough to handle all the flows, and so the state has required us to modify that to allow for that. And then electrical, it is online. We have gotten El Estero, desal, and the chemical feed station all separated. That was a big move, because now we basically have them independently powered, and they have their own meters, so we know exactly how much power is going to each one of those facilities. So if there's any other questions on desal status, be happy to discuss those. Moving on to water sales agreement. Not a lot to report except to say that negotiations are still going on. We have a meeting with Montecito back today to continue to refine the draft terms of the agreement. We are working to wrap it up in the next couple weeks. And once we get it done, we'll be bringing it back to the elected boards, council, and the Montecito Water District for public discussion about those terms. So, water supply strategy. This was an interesting one. I was writing this up yesterday. I think we're on track for a positive improvement in our water supply situation. It's something I haven't seen in a long time, and I'm pleased to have at least some hope here. We still have 2 more months of potential rainfall this year. That's, where we are right now is where we were in March last year. We were so close last year, and then it just dried up. So I feel like we have 2 more months of potentially wet weather. Feeling much more confident about our local water supplies getting something. Unfortunately, it's premature because we do have, as I mentioned, some challenges. Water quality, when will we be able to use that water in Gibraltar is a big question. And then the runoff, as we talked about, when water goes into Cachuma, it may not necessarily end up in accounts that help the city. We're continuing to plan right now for continued drought and looking out in the future, but we will be revisiting this. We expect to make major modifications to it in March. I hate to make too many changes when the ball keeps changing so drastically, but we certainly believe in March we should have a good sense of where we're going to be headed for the next year. I don't think I need to go through that. Drought funding, just wanted to give a little status update on what we've been working on. Prop 1, as you recall, there was $96 million set aside for desal projects. They have still not, now it's approved by the voters in 2014, they have still not released any of that money, and we are still waiting on draft guidelines for that to come out. Based on what we initially saw, our project is not going to be eligible, and however, we've been working to try and get the attention of the director of DWR such that they could change the eligibility date, keeping in mind that the voters thought that they were doing something to help out this drought. We went forward in good faith with a project that truly brings on additional water for this community and for this state, in that sense, taking pressure off other water supplies. And we believe this money this project should be eligible for some of that grant funding. And right now, the maximum is about $5 million, which I think would be welcomed. There has been weekly meetings right now with the State Office of Emergency Services to try and get additional grant funding to help offset some of the drought costs. And they continue to work on developing regional projects that can be supported by everyone. And so it's a bit of negotiations. DSouth, certainly one of those projects in there. North County is looking for grant assistance with the suspended Table A. You may recall that we're not interested in that, but there were some substantial costs associated with going after that suspended Table A, and North County is interested in that. And I think if North County can get behind DSAL, we can get behind supporting their Table A allocation, because it does increase the amount of water coming into CCWA. So, and then there are several other projects that are included in there. The permanent pipeline in Kachuma, so that we don't have to move the barge back and forth, basically putting that pipeline on the bottom of the lake. Federal funding, they just issued the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. This was championed by Feinstein, and there is some money in there for DSAL, but it's not clear that our project would be eligible based on just the timing of this. But we are going to go ahead and submit for an intent or interest in the funding. And then we have state revolving fund loan, as we talked about today, pursuing funding for the conveyance pipeline, and then, of course, if we need it, DSAL expansion. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Warden.
Chair Kilborn and members of the Water Commission, my name is Madeline Ward. I'm the Water Conservation Supervisor, and I wanted to give you a quick lawn watering ban status update. As you know, this was adopted by City Council on December 6th of last year and took effect January 1st of this year. We're continuing our outreach to the community, our water customers, and landscape professionals. In terms of enforcement, we've only received 15 violation complaints so far this year or this month, and only 2 of those were for lawn watering. I think one thing we're all benefiting from in multiple ways is the recent rainfall. So most people have turned off their systems, and we encourage anyone who hasn't to please turn off your sprinkler systems and enjoy the rainfall. The city, of course, is here to help our customers break up with their lawn, in a sense, with free water checkups, rebates, and a variety of online resources. If you don't know where to start for a WaterWise landscape, we have a great WaterWise plant database with over 1,000 WaterWise plants, as well as virtual garden tours of beautiful local gardens, so you can sort of pick which plants you like best, get inspiration, create a plant list, etc. It's a great way to start. And we have a lot of great helpful how-to videos on irrigation, as well as our long-running GardenWise TV show that has many different episodes that cover lawn removal, design of WaterWise landscapes, rain gardens, recommended plant palettes, and more. Today, I'm also here to announce the recipient of the 2016 Water Hero Award. This award is given out every year, and it highlights individuals, businesses, and organizations that go above and beyond in their water conservation efforts and serve as an example of resource efficiency to our community. Some of the prior recipients include the Eucalyptus Hill Homeowners Association, Santa Barbara City College, the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, the Tobes Group, and Dennis Allen. So the 2016 Water Hero Award, I'm pleased to announce, is the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. 2016 was a big year for the garden. They celebrated their 90th anniversary, and they also opened a new conservation center, a new garden, the Island View Garden, and a redesigned garden, the Waterwise Home Garden. In 2010, they updated their mission to serve as a role model for sustainability, and over the past 6 years, they've incorporated many sustainability initiatives in the garden and with community partners. So the Waterwise Home Garden was redesigned in 2016, and it highlights a lot of beautiful, easy-to-grow native plants. One aspect of native plants that people are often concerned about is the maintenance of them. So there's a lot of great handouts and signage throughout the garden to help people better identify which are sort of the bomb-proof natives, as the garden likes to say, so those that are a little more adaptable to home landscapes. There's also a great rain garden, a rain collection tank, which you can see, right down here. And coming soon will be a great mulch display, an irrigation display, and a laundry to landscape gray water system. So it demonstrates multiple ways you can save water in your own backyard. Along with the Pritzlaff Conservation Center, the garden also unveiled a brand new garden last year called the Island View Garden. It was completed in 2016, and it highlights native plants from the Channel Islands, which include the 8 California Channel Islands and the 8 Baja Islands. It collects rainwater runoff from both the parking lot and the new building. It's channeled through these great bioswales. Let's see. You can sort of see them right here on the edge of the pathway. And then it's collected into 3 15,000-gallon tanks, which total 45,000 gallons of storage for irrigation. So it's a water-neutral garden. And I really like this quote from Dr. Steve Winhager, the executive director. It just really highlights that their gardens throughout the 78 acres of the whole Botanic Garden demonstrate both the beauty of the native plants and also that they can benefit the environment compared to a conventional landscape. So the garden has served as a role model for sustainable practices for 90 years, and especially in the past 6 years with their new mission statement. And for that, we congratulate them in receiving the 2016 Water Hero Award. And we're here for any questions you may have.
All right, any questions, comments? No? All right. Thank you very much for the update. And congrats to the Botanical Garden. Okay. That was 6C. We'll move on to item number 7, the Water Resources Manager's Report.
Mr. Chair, given the time we have, I was going to just basically summarize that our groundwater production is doing well. We've exceeded our planned production for the month of December, and overall limited use of potable water in the recycled water system. We had a use of 4 acre-feet this month. That was part of the repairs that were still underway that were bridged between November and early December. And going forward, we have no anticipation for any large usage of potable water. Right now, demands are extremely low, and the plant, even in its current capacity, is able to keep up. From there, I was just going to skip to another major highlight, which is near the end of your packet, which is the spills. We did finish 2016 with 7 spills. Our goal was 8 or less. And so the discussion continues with council on whether or not to extend the consent decree. This was officially the last year of the consent decree, but I think what we're mostly focused on is that we continue to show a decrease in our SSO events, and certainly I'm hopeful that it will stay that low. But I think there is some, fluctuation, general fluctuation. But in general, we're down substantially from where we were in 2008, 2009.
Quick question: will we continue to track that and going forward?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's much of this. The way we've looked at it, regardless of whether we're in a consent decree or not, this is, I think, valuable and helpful information and an indicator of how we are performing, and so we will continue to provide that information.
Thanks.
And that concludes my comments.
All right, excellent. Well, it sounds like the Water Commission in upcoming meetings would like to have a little more discussion on the recycled water system. So we can start thinking about that and get that discussion going further. That'd be great. Any other comments before we go? All right, I will call this meeting adjourned. Next meeting is Thursday, February 16th at 9 a.m. Thanks. Thank you.
May be high, but I can't see a thing in the sky.